Wow. We could just go home right now, couldn't we? Thank you, Seth, and all of you this morning. And all of you out there sounded fantastic, too. I love the theology in that song that says, you make beautiful things out of dust. You make beautiful things out of us. That's a story of what Jesus does in our lives. That's the story of what we're going to be talking about today as we talk about God using your life to serve others. So 3 weeks ago, we started just a short series talking about 3 of the Grove's core values. We talk here often about being a place where people love God, grow together, and then we say serve the world. And so today we come to week 3, serve the world. Now, this morning I'm not talking about serving in the context of any kind of program or some kind of project. I'm talking about serving others as a way of life. On your everyday, ordinary, pedestrian road of life, stopping to be that person who is serving God whenever the opportunity arises. When I say that, I think of 2 people we have at the Grove that live every day that way, in just a small way. One is John Gromberg. John Gromberg keeps a tool chest in the back of his truck, and it's stocked with everything you need to change a flat tire, fix a flat jack, the crowbar, whatever you use to take the bolts off, whatever. And whenever he sees someone broken down or with a flat tire, John Gromberg stops. Another person that's been in the Grove for a long time, he just moved to Seattle. His name is Steve Hosell. Steve is a pilot with American Airlines. And Steve, when he goes to work, or when he was here at the Grove, and he still comes back every few weeks, he would take 2 roller bags to work with him every time he went to fly for American. One roller bag was full of his belongings. The other roller bag he packed for someone that was stranded in an airport, or someone that he said, Palmer, there's people in places like Baltimore that get snowed in, and they have to sleep in the airport. So he packed a roller bag for them. Or he said, outside my hotel sometimes, there'll be a homeless person, and the roller bag is for them. And he packed in it a towel, a blanket, a change of clothes, toiletries, dental floss, and a Bible. Everything you need. Snacks, Gatorade was all in this roller bag. And so whenever he left his house for work, wherever he was flying to in the country, he was ready to serve at a moment's notice. That's my challenge to you today, in a nutshell, to start living that way. Because Christ, when he was here, he laid down this example for us. He says in Matthew 20, verse 28, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And he gives us this example in John chapter 13. He's having this last dinner with his followers. We call it the Last Supper. And there's this dramatic moment when all of a sudden he stands up from the table, he takes off his coat, and he wraps a towel around his waist like a servant would. And then he gets down on his knees and he starts to wash their feet, one at a time, all of them. And then he makes this statement. It's a very compelling statement after he washes their feet. He says, follow my example. Do as I have done, and you will live the blessed life. That's what he promises in that. So I have this key idea just as we start. I hope this sinks in. Take this home with you. Jesus lived a life interrupted serving others. He constantly stopped to do love and show compassion, and he wants you to live the same way. Serving and loving others on the everyday, ordinary road of life. So the question that I hope you're asking is, well, how do I make serving others an everyday habit? And so my challenge to you is to start here. Embrace the interruptions. Embrace the interruptions. They're usually divine, but embrace the interruptions and make serving others a habit. So we read this in Romans chapter 12, verse 1. This is from the Message Bible. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping and eating and going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. The challenge is to say, God, here's my life. Take it, it's yours, and use it. So this morning, our text is from John chapter 1. So open to John with me. And in John 1, we read this moment in Jesus' life when he's interrupted. He constantly embraced the interruptions. And we'll start in verse 1, but we're going to make our way through most of the chapter. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick, and he was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Mary. This is the Mary whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. Move down to verse 6. And he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. So Jesus is a long way from Judea, but he embraces the interruption. He says, okay, I'll go. If you notice Jesus' life much at all, you'll notice that he was interrupted on a moment's notice. He would stop and serve in whatever was needed. A woman was sick and she grabs his coat and he heals her. And then a man runs up and says, my daughter is dying. Can you leave what you're doing and come to my house? And he does. He's teaching on one day, and a guy comes crashing through the roof in the middle of his sermon and says, hey, could you fix my leg? I can't walk. And he would stop and he would do it. He's giving a speech on a mountainside, a sermon to 5,000 people. And one of his disciples comes and taps on his shoulder and says, hey, you may be the greatest orator of all time, but people are hungry. And so he stops teaching and he feeds them. Jesus always embraced the interruption. Not so much for us. Most of us, let's be honest here, we don't like the interruptions at all. I've seen you wear your headphones to the gym. I know you. You don't want people talking to you. I see you in the airports and on the airplane with your headphones. Just a sign, don't bother me now. I've been in your houses when the doorbell rings. Nobody likes it today when the doorbell rings. There's a comedian by the name of Sebastian Maniscalco, and he talks about how we answer the doorbell differently today than years and years ago when he was a kid. And when he talked about his family, it sounds a lot like my family, because back in the day, in the late 70s or early 80s when I grew up, when the doorbell rang, it was an event. You would come running to the door. All the kids would come running. Your parents would come to the door. My dad would open it and go, look, the Wilsons are here. And he'd say, and my mom would say, they just dropped in. It's the greatest thing ever. You don't know what dropped in means. It means showing up without texting or calling ahead. And then my dad would say, come in. And we could stop doing homework. We could stay up late. He'd say, bust out the Yahtzee and the pit game. And then my mom would say, we're having pie. There were always 2 pies in the fridge. I don't know about your house. One we could eat, and one was just in the fridge for the company. And we'd say, who's the company? And she'd say, they're going to drop in. And so you can't touch that one. The Cokes in the back of the fridge were for the company. You can't. When are they? You don't worry about that. The company, they'll just ring the doorbell. And it was a big event. It was the best thing ever when the doorbell rang. Today, it's different. Today, when the doorbell rings, your kids don't run to the door. They run away from the door. And they come running in your bedroom going, Dad, the doorbell rang. What do we do? And your high school kids, they're grabbing baseball bats. Dad, the doorbell. Who's coming? And you're saying, get down. I'll go find out. Get down. Everybody, find a place behind the curtains. And then Maniscalco says there's always the one kid upstairs that didn't hear the doorbell. And he comes down a little late. Hey, why is everybody hiding and running around with the bats? And you're saying, get down, the doorbell. Because there's nothing good when the doorbell rings. It's either the red light camera people sending someone with a warrant, or it's a serial killer. Those are the only 2 people that are going to ring your doorbell without. Because if your friends are coming, they better call an hour ahead. And then they better text you from the corner, rounding the corner now, pulling up in your driveway, about to ring the doorbell. Why does your son have a baseball bat? I can see him. That's how we go through life, whether it's at work or at home. And when we look at the life of Jesus, he says, embrace the interruption. There's people around you that need your attention and your help. Maybe it's as simple as a coworker or a neighbor or a friend, and maybe all they need is a ride to the airport. And usually they just need someone to listen and to pay attention. But my challenge this morning is to embrace those moments. I think they're divine. The Holy Spirit is often speaking to us, saying, stop and ask, what? You look like you're crying, or you look like something's bothering you. Can I help you? And sometimes we miss that opportunity. My challenge this morning is to serve those who can never return the favor. Serve those, maybe it's a coworker, help them with a project, and this person could never advance your career, but serve them anyway. Serve silently. Serve without drawing attention to yourself. Maybe do something without even being asked. Maybe give a gift without even telling where it came from, or write a note of encouragement. Maybe do something for a friend who you know needs help, but they won't ask for it, so you just do it anyway. I have a friend who talks about his old neighbor, and I never heard the guy's name. He just said he just called his neighbor Super Neighbor. He said his neighbor would do stuff for him without even asking. Like if he's mowing his lawn, Super Neighbor would just bust over and mow his front lawn. When it was garbage day, Super Neighbor would pull out his garbage and then go get my buddy's garbage and pull that out too. If he went on a trip, Super Neighbor would come over and start picking up the newspapers every morning. That's when newspapers were still delivered. And when he came back, he'd say, hey, I brought all your newspapers here. You don't want people to know you're gone. Something bad could happen. And he would do that for him. True story. He says one morning he comes out and hears Super Neighbor on his knees by his car. And he says, Super Neighbor, what's wrong? He's got a compressor with him. He said, I came out for a run, but he said, I saw your tire was flat. So I got my tire repair kit, and I pulled the nail out, and I plugged it, and I just got my compressor, plugged it in, just finished pumping it up. You should make it a work on time. Who does that? Super Neighbor does. I want to find out where Super Neighbor lives so I can buy the house next to him. I thought this, what if we had 2,000 or 3,000 people from the Grove going through their everyday, ordinary life, like Super Neighbor, just serving in the most ordinary ways, going through Tempe, Gilbert, Chandler. Last service, someone said, say Maricopa, wherever you live. And you know what would happen? The name of Jesus Christ would become famous because all of us here were serving in the most ordinary, simple, everyday kind of way. So my first challenge to you this morning is to make serving a habit. The next, as we pick up in the passage, I want you to go back to verse 3. I want to remind you of this, that serving is a way of loving. I think sometimes we miss that. Verse 3, the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. Now move down to verse 17. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Verse 21, Lord, so he's dead. Lord, Martha says to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Underline that in the Bible. That's a great line. Verse 35, and then Jesus wept. He starts to cry. And then the Jews said, see how he loved him. Do you see what I mean when I say serving someone, meeting their needs, is a way of saying, I love you, or a way of showing the love of God? In the context of your family, serving is most definitely a way of loving. For those of you who cook, if you make a meal for your wife, you're not just cutting potatoes or making a lasagna, you're saying, I love you. Or if you cook a whole meal for your family, for your husband, you're saying, I love you. When your kids go to school and one of them forgot to make their bed, you have two choices. You could wait and really give them the business when they come home at 3:30, or you could make their bed, and as you're not just making their bed, you're saying, I love you. If you clean a bathroom or mow the lawn or vacuum, you're not just vacuuming, you're not just mowing, you're saying, I love you. I hear some parents say, well, my kids are in junior high now. They can make their own sandwiches for school. They can make their own lunch. Can I tell you right now, they're not making lunch. They're grabbing a bag of Doritos and a ding-dong, and that's about it. But it's not lunch. And so can I just say, even for your junior hires, when you're putting the mustard and the mayonnaise on the bread, you're not just making a sandwich, you're saying, I love you. Even though they're completely capable of doing that. But sometimes we miss that. And it's the same for our friends, for our neighbors, for coworkers, for strangers on the street. When you do something for them, you're not just serving them, you're saying, God loves you, and I care about you. A neighbor is trying to paint his house, and you can see he's having a hard time, and you go over there to help. You're not just saying, you're not just helping, you're not just painting a garage. You're saying, I care about you, and I love you. If you take a sick neighbor a meal for their family, you're not just bringing them a meal. You're saying, God loves you, and I care about you. Serving is a way of loving. I'll say this next as we keep making our way through our passage. When you serve, you go on an adventure with God. I don't know if you've read John 11 before, but there's a story behind the story, and this is what's happening. It's a dangerous story. We'll pick up in verse 8. So the disciples are warning Jesus, and they say, Rabbi, a short while ago, the Jews in Judea, tried to stone you. They tried to kill you. And yet you want to go back? Verse 16. And then Thomas, the one called the twin, said to his companions, come along. We might as well die with him. You know, it sounds pretty dangerous. It sounds like somebody's going to die. But if you know much about guys at all, they're always up for an adventure, even if it means dying. And can I just remind you that when you start listening to the Spirit of God saying serve in the most ordinary ways, you go on an adventure with God, your life fills with new stories and new friendships. Sometimes serving can just be very ordinary. Sometimes it's helping someone who's sick. Sometimes it's watching someone's kids. Sometimes it's taking on a project at work for someone else, a ride to the airport, helping someone move. They're very ordinary things. But sometimes when you give your life to becoming a person who serves, then you go on an adventure with God. Sometimes serving gets really big, and it involves passports and jumbo jets and anti-malaria medication and oceans. That's what happens when you say, okay, God, here's my life. Use it for your kingdom. I know that because I get to go places with a lot of you. I went to Liberia a few years ago with some of you. We were going to rebuild some dorms after the war there. And we needed electricians, so I called 3 of my cousins. They know electrical work well, and I say, I need your help. I need your help. And so they agreed to go, and we met at the airport, and then for the next 30 hours through Washington, D.C., to Brussels, Belgium, and then down to Monrovia, for 30 hours, they're only asking me about the snakes. They keep saying, Palmer, are there snakes in Liberia? I go, yeah, there's a few. Okay, there's a lot. I said, and they go, are they poisonous? Yeah, sure. You have the 5-step green mamba, you've got the spitting cobra, you got the black cobra, the gaboon viper. But I said the boa constrictor is not poisonous. He'll just squeeze you to death. But so then they're saying, okay, they're poisonous, but can I die? And I'm going, I don't know anyone who's died. Don't worry so much about the snakes. You know, you're going to be fine. So this goes on for 30 hours. Then finally we're making a 9-hour drive up into the bush to where the college is. And they're still asking me. So finally I say, hey guys, listen, I guarantee you won't even see a snake. I guarantee you won't even see one. So 9 hours in the van, we park it at the college, and just to stretch, I said, let's walk down to the river. We hadn't even gone in our house yet. And we walked down to the river, and we're standing on the banks, and here's my cousin, my youngest one down here. He says, hey, so Palmer, are these green snakes over here poisonous? I said, what? I come over, and here's 2 green mambas coming up the bank. I said, throw a rock and run, you know. And they're going, you guaranteed us. Those guys saw more snakes in 10 days than anyone I've ever taken to Africa. I'm not kidding you. The night watchman killed a spitting cobra, and then it was outside their window, so he rolled it up outside the window. He said, I thought they would want to see it in the morning. I said, no, they're never going to sleep the rest of the trip. This actually happened. They were working on a dorm doing electrical. They walked out of their building for lunch. Under a palm tree, a green mamba dove out of the tree at them, missed, hit the ground. The guys with machetes killed it and ate it for lunch. Okay, so the whole time they're going, Palmer, you weren't straight with us. You were lying to us. I said, no, I don't know. So, but here's the thing. They'll never forget that trip. But here's the thing. You can either stay home, lay on the couch, watch South Park and eat bonbons, or you can go to places like Liberia and serve and have stories you'll never forget. By the way, after the last service, someone came up and they handed me this flyer in your bulletin, and it says, "Come to Liberia with us." I lost it. Oh, he said, "Bad Sunday to mention snakes, but I'm telling you guys, you're not going to get bit. You might see one, but you're not going to die." So trust me on that. All right, when you serve, you go on an adventure with God. Understand this next. So as we keep going through our passage, I want to say to you next, when you serve, it forces you, it causes you, helps you to step out of the center of everything. In verse 11, so if you, like I said a moment ago, the disciples had been warning Jesus, "Hey, we could die. People want to kill you." Verse 11, Jesus says, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up." Do you hear what Jesus is saying? Our friend is in trouble. So let's stop worrying so much about me. And Jesus is saying, this isn't about me. This is about serving someone else. The truth about all of our lives is our tendency is to live in the center of everything. The gravity of the universe, if you're honest about your life, it's the gravity of the universe centers on you. That's just how human beings are wired. We expect the world to rotate around us. We want everything to be most about us and our own happiness. But when we serve, we step out of the middle of everything, out of the center, and Christ becomes the center of our lives as you serve. As we serve like Christ, you put the other person's need in front of your needs. That's why I say serving someone, it's a bit like heaven, because when you serve someone else, you're saying your needs are more important than my needs. And you've stepped out of being the center of everything, the center of attention or anything else. You know, when you step out of the center, you realize that God may want you to go places, or God may want you to do things that you don't necessarily want to do. If we read the whole chapter 11, you would see that Jesus waited 2 days before he left to help his sick friend Lazarus. And you wonder, well, why did he wait 2 days? This is just my conjecture, but I think it's very possible. On the inside, he didn't really want to go back to Judea. If there's a place where people wanted to kill me, I wouldn't be so excited about heading that direction. And what I hope you see is that many times God will ask you to serve in a way that maybe you don't want to serve. He may even ask you to go somewhere where you don't want to go. The Holy Spirit may be speaking to you, prodding you, go talk to your neighbor. You know they've been hurting, or you know they've been lonely, and you've been dragging your feet. And maybe not just 2 days, maybe it's been 2 months or 2 years. I want to say listen to the call of God's Spirit and step out of center and start to serve others. And then I'll say this next, that as we talk about this idea of serving others, I hope you know that you have a gift. The Bible keeps telling us that we all have spiritual gifts and really abilities, things that we do better than anyone else. In 1 Peter, we read this, "As each one has received a special gift, employ it in serving one another." Going back to John chapter 11, I say that you have a gift, you have a role, you have something you're meant to do. And when we go back to this passage, we see that Jesus arrives, and we read this in verse 38. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid in front of the entrance. And then he says to the people standing there, he says, "Roll away the stone." So could Jesus have rolled away the stone? Probably. He could have said to the stone, "Move," or he could have helped push it. But there's some things that God does well. There's some things that he asks us to do. Maybe it's as menial as rolling away the stone. If we keep reading, we see in verse 43, he yells, "Lazarus, come out." And Lazarus comes stumbling out. It's like a scene out of a zombie movie, and he's got bandages wrapped all over him. And do you know what Jesus says in verse 44? He says to everyone standing there, "Remove the bandages." And you may think, well, Jesus, why can't you just remove the bandages? Because there's some things that God does, but then there's other things, other roles that he has for you to play. And it may be simple, it may be hard, it may be difficult. But my question to you this morning is what has God called you to do? What do you do best? Like I said, the scripture says every believer has a gift. We read, there's a list in 1 Corinthians, there's a list in Romans. So if you want to look at Romans chapter 12 with me, and we read this. We have different gifts. This is verse 6. According to the grace God has given each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it's teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is to give generously, then give. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. And then the list goes on in the New Testament. Some are called to be artisans, some hosts, some have wisdom, some are teachers, and then teach. But my point in saying all this is that you have a divine gift from God himself. God made you you. He made you unique. He made you to have a passion for some things that most people don't have a passion for. Some of you have an eye for organization, and so help get things going. Some of you have an ear for music. Maybe you should be tutoring and teaching kids to play instruments. Some of you have a heart for justice. Some of you have a heart for compassion. Some of you have strong bodies. We need you to change tires and pour concrete. Some of you here have never met a stranger. You can talk to anybody about anything, and you're an expert on every subject. We need you greeting out here. We need you just meeting everybody. And then we need you traveling with us to African villages, sitting down with chiefs, and just let them talk in Chichewa, and you can talk back. You may not understand a word, but you'll keep the conversation going. So you see, God has something for all of us. I have three questions for you to ask yourself. Maybe you've never thought about what is my spiritual gift? What is my area of giftedness? The first thing I would challenge you to think about, what is it that when you do it, someone's life is blessed? But here's three other questions. What do you do well and love doing it? What are you most passionate about? Where do you want God to take your life? And so start thinking about those things. If you've never put your finger on what it is that God has blessed your life with. So the final thought that I want to share with you this morning is that we sometimes need to let others serve you. And if you go back to verse 2, we see this kind of backstory given to the whole episode. John, the writer, goes back and he starts to tell us about Mary. So listen to this. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So in that story, in that moment when Mary comes to pour perfume on Jesus' feet, you know, his disciples tried to stop her. They said, hey, don't interrupt him. He's busy. And then Jesus says, no, let her come. And then others said, hey, she's wasting the perfume. It's expensive. And Jesus says, no, let her bless me. I spent a lot of time blessing others. Let her bless me. There's this moment I mentioned when Jesus was washing the feet of the disciples. And Peter says to him, there's no way on this earth I'm going to let you wash my feet. And Jesus says, you need to let me wash your feet. Because when you are blessed, if you let me bless you, then you can turn around and bless others. And so I want to remind you that when others try to bless you, that maybe it's a gift from God. So let them do that. Our natural tendency, as maybe especially as Americans, is not to want to feel like we're charity. We don't mind giving charity. We don't want to be charity. And so often if someone tries to help us or serve us or give us something, we tend to say, oh, it's okay, I don't need that. Or we say, you don't have to help with that. But can I just say this morning, don't say that. Because if you say, I don't need your help, I don't need you to serve me, then you rob them of their chance to be a blessing. You rob them of a chance to live like Christ. You rob them of the chance to connect with you. In a small way, you kind of push them away and reject them. And so when God sends someone your way to bless you with a gift or to serve you, then just accept it. It feels a little humbling. but it will change something in you when you do that. My wife, Veronica, and I have a good friend named Denise, and Denise tells a story about this. Some years ago, her grandmother passed away. On the day that her grandmother passed away, Veronica happened to be at her house with a number of other friends, about a dozen other women from the Grove. And they all came to Denise, and they said, hey, we want to host the reception for your grandmother. And Denise said, no, we're going to have it catered. You don't need to worry about that. That's too much work. I've got it taken care of. It's fine. I don't need your help. And so they left. Veronica said about an hour later, their other friend, Casey, who had been at the house, called her. And she said, Veronica, I'm going to call Denise back. And I'm going to tell her that whether she wants our help or not, we're going to show up and we're going to host that reception for her. And so she called Denise and she said, we're coming. And she called all those dozen women back. And they started to bake cakes and make salads and order flowers. And Denise says this, when she walked into that reception, she said it was the most beautiful spread of food and flowers she's ever seen in her life. And she said that, this was the first time in my life that someone had done something for me. She says this, she said, I didn't grow up in the church. I wasn't used to people coming together when you had a need and meeting it. She said, so this was the first time when I really understood what it meant to be part of a church, what it really meant to be a follower of Christ. And she says, you know what? Because I was blessed by them, now my favorite thing to do in the world is to find ways to bless others. And so I just want to remind you as we close that when God sends people your way, let them bless you, because you'll learn to become a blessing to others in the same way.